will be sharing their reports on the deliberations that have taken place in the 2 breakout sessions that we've had yesterday and today. N. Bhanumurthy is the chair for TF1, and he's also Vice Chancellor for Dr. B.R. Ambedkar School of Economics, University, India. Erin Watson-Lynn is co-chair TF2 and founder and managing director Baker and York, Australia. Anita Prakash is co-chair for TF3 and senior policy advisor at ERIA, Indonesia. Toni is co-chair TF4 and head Institute for Climate and Society, Brazil. Amar Bhattacharya is co-chair TF5 and senior fellow Center for Sustainable Development, Brookings, USA. G.A. Tadas is chair for TF6 and visiting fellow at RIS, India. And finally, André de Mello Souza is co-chair for TF7 Planning and Research Technician, Board of Studies at the Institute of Economic Relations and International Policies in Brazil. Can we have Mr. Bhanumurthy on stage? Erin Watson-Lynn. Sorry, just Mr. Bhanumurthy first.
Thank you, Sunena. I'm talking on behalf of Task Force 1. It's on macroeconomics, trade and livelihoods, policy coherence and international coordination. It's a very long task force. We have very eminent scholars in this. People like Dr. Harshvardhan Singh, Dr. Rakesh Mohan, Professor Pamidua, and others. And as a task force, we had 3 discussions. One on the 9th January, we had a ice-breaking meeting. And yesterday we had in the breakout session, and also we had a session today. So as you know that these 3 topics are very large, like macroeconomics, trade and livelihoods are 3 different topics altogether. So what we did was we actually broke the whole task force into 3 subgroups. One looking at the macroeconomics, another one looking at the trade, and another one on the livelihoods. The macroeconomics, myself and Dr. Poonam Gupta will be looking at to that. And for the trade, we have Dr. Harshvardhan Singh. And for livelihoods, we requested Dr. Radhika Kapoor to coordinate these issues. And as the Secretariat pointed out, we have raised 3 themes within the subgroup. And for the macro, we had narrowed down on some of the topics. As you know that, all this, there are so many topics have come up in the discussion, but this is only a preliminary themes that we are raising it, but we'll be open to any of the comments from all the other members also. In the macro themes, we had narrowed down on swap lines, the role of foreign exchange reserves, and in fact, if you have seen today's S&P report, it said that due to the increase in the recent interest rates, the borrowing costs would have increased by 8.6 trillion in the world. So, and I mean, I think that issue becomes very important for G20 nations. And in fact, yesterday, Deepak Mishra also pointed out that the debt levels, both in the advanced countries and EMDs, is increasing. So one of the topics that we thought we should look at is the debt distress and the overall recovery process. And the third theme that we looked at is the fiscal space. Again, somebody's pointed out yesterday, the recovery is still fragile and uneven, and what is the role of the fiscal policies, and is there a fiscal space for addressing the recovery process. And another issue that came up in the discussion is the coordination between the fiscal and monetary policies. Again, have you seen how there was a disconnect between the monetary and fiscal policies in many of the emerging market economies and also in the advanced countries? I think there is a need to look at the coordination between the fiscal monetary, and some members actually raised the issue of central bank independence also. And another issue that came up in the macro theme was the fiscal policy and the climate change. And I think there are some issues are cross-cutting between the task forces, but we would like to look at this particular issue also in this theme. This subgroup is basically, Dr. Poonam Gupta, myself, Dr. Sonobi from ADBI, Dr. Pamit Dua, and Ambassador Karamuru and Dr. Gulbin will be part of this sub-themes. And on the trade, which Dr. Harshvardhan Singh is leading, there are 3 or 4 main issues that have been brought up. And I think we just had a nice discussion on the digital technology. And I think digital trade becomes a very important aspect. So we'll be looking at in this task force as well. The global supply chains, global value chains again came up in many discussions, and the role of ESG requirements. And I think the WTO reform is going to be one of the main important aspect in this task force as well. And the factors affecting participation of MSMEs in the international trade is again discussed, and the impact of preferential trade agreements on members and non-member countries. Data for development, I think this is another thing that has come up, data for trade and development. So some of the themes that has been raised in this task force may get into the working group as well. And in fact, in the discussion we had, we wanted the T20 Secretariat to also share the timelines for other working groups and also the themes that has been raised, so that the task forces that the report that's coming up from here can actually get into the discussion in the working groups as well. So this subgroup is, it has Dr. Verab, Dr. Damuri, Dr. Kimura, Ms. Gulbin, Dr. Axel Berger, Dr. Kim, and Dr. Sergio. These are all the co-chairs that are going to be part of these subgroups. The third one is the livelihoods. Again, this is a very broad topic, but we have narrowed down on 3 or 4 important issues. One is that reducing the gender and wage gap in the labor market. I think that that's an important issue that has come up yesterday also. The second one is education and employment. I think the learning losses that happened in the COVID period and how its impact on the productivity becomes another important issue for discussion. The role of MSMEs, access to finance and market and access to the markets, and the role of MSMEs in job creation, that is another thing that we are going to look at. And the future of work, I think this is something that has come up in many other discussions also. So this will be, this group will have Dr. Radhika Kapoor, Dr. Albert Park, Professor Gala, they'll be part of this. And I think Dr. Rakesh Mohan was here. He will be helping us in all the sub-themes. And in terms of papers, as you know that the abstracts are going to be, we have the date up to 17th. Till now, the Secretariat said that we have received almost 80 papers. We are going to work out how to shortlist the papers, looking at, the regional perspective, gender perspective, as well as multidisciplinarity issues. And in terms of the events, right now, there are 2 or 3 events actually planned up. One, I think NCR is going to do as part of their annual India Policy Forum. And Dr. Pamidua has proposed one event at the Delhi School of Economics. And then we propose to have a couple of events, again cross-cutting with the Task Force 3. I think Dr. Ambassador Chinna is here. We plan to have a town hall meeting in Bangalore sometime in the month of April. And then with the Task Force 6, we will have another event plan in Bangalore, again in the month of April. So the whole point is that I think one of the important things that has come out in our discussion is that ultimately the policy briefs that we are going to prepare, it has to feed into the working group's discussion. So I think that link we request the T20 Secretariat to establish so that we get a timeline so that we'll be supplying the kind of commentary or the policy briefs to the working group. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. I'm going to invite our next speaker, Erin Watson-Lynn, co-chair for TF2.
Thank you very much for having me up here. I definitely have a personal preference for sitting down in a chair and having a conversation, and I always feel uncomfortable behind a lectern, but here we are. Okay, so Task Force 2. What I'm going to do is I'm going to take you through sort of what we're focusing on from a thematic perspective, and then I'm going to go through some of the conversations that we had that are quite specific to our group, but then how that builds into a bigger conversation around what we're doing with the T20, and then finish on a couple of points that I think that we all need to think about as we go through this process this year. So where we ended up is we've got 7 broad themes, which we also have invited papers from within our task force to write abstracts for and write policy papers for. So, and then what we'll be doing is when we go through our abstracts that we need to review is we'll sort of be looking at them through the lens of these 7 themes as well. So the first one is around defining what digital public infrastructure actually is, and I have to say that as a group we probably spent the most amount of time debating or arguing about what that actually is, but I'll come back to that shortly. We have another theme of alternatives to digital public infrastructure, although I'm not too sure that the word alternatives is great. If anyone has a different option, I'm talking things like Web3, big tech, homegrown. We also have governance of digital public infrastructure, financing, innovation, regulation and sustainability. So they're the 7 themes that we'll be looking at. And over the course of this year, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think we'll be having 26 events over the course of the year, which I won't go through in a huge amount of detail now. But what I will talk about is what we spend a lot of time debating, which is actually about what digital public infrastructure actually is. We argued about old academic definitions and some of the challenges that we have going forward. And one of the things I wanted to talk about, which goes into one of the existential points about the G20, is that when it comes to digital public infrastructure, India has a particular perspective, Australia has a particular perspective, Brazil has another perspective, Argentina does. And so I'll bring that to life for you for what that actually means. So in India, you have systems like Aadhaar, which is amazing, right? A state-based digital identification system. And it's been brilliant in countries like India and others that have a very similar system for things like overcoming corruption, financial inclusion, especially for women and people at the bottom of the economic pyramid. But some people were surprised to hear when I told them this in conversations when I could get my words in, was that in Australia, when we need to show our ID, we take in a hard copy passport or plug in our driver's license number. There's just no, we don't have that problem to solve in Australia when it comes to digital public infrastructure. And Australia's idea of digital transformation is being able to log into a website or downloading an app and, like I said, plugging in the passport number. So we're operating in really different contexts. And often in Australia, these are not public, they're not actually owned by the state. So we have an environment where often the state says, okay, well, we've got this idea, but we're going to have that implemented by PwC or Deloitte. And if you Google digital public infrastructure in Australia, the reports are written by these companies as well, because obviously they have a stake in it. So you end up in this situation where maybe it's not actually public infrastructure, it's digital private infrastructure. So these are the kinds of conversations that we were having in our group, and some of the challenges that we have. And just to add on to that, one of the conversations we had towards the end there was around how if you have digital private goods that the state doesn't have the capacity to implement, we end up privatising the profits and socialising the losses. So when that company says we need a bailout, my taxes bail them out. And so that's a regulatory challenge for our group as well that we need to be looking at. But what I think is really important and something that came through in our group is because of this sort of really diverse situation that we've got when it comes to digital public infrastructure, and you know, if there was an American in the room, it might even be further along the line or along that continuum than Australia. But it's the importance of South-South leadership on some of these issues, and obviously that continuity. So with the current troika that we have at the moment with Indonesia, India, Brazil, and then South Africa coming afterward, what are the problems that you need to solve? Because they are different to what we need to solve in Australia, but where do those problems then intersect? And that's where I think that we can reach consensus in a multilateral like G20. So for you, it might be about government-to-person payments. For us, it might be about cross-border data flows. So how do they intersect? Where do they intersect? And then how can we get consensus? On the existential point that I think has come out of this conversation in our task force, but then also the broader conversations over the last 48 hours, there's 2 points. So one is what actually is success this year. So one for the T20, but then therefore each of the task forces. And I think that we're still grappling with that as a task force. So obviously we have our 7 themes that we're going to be looking at issues through. We obviously will have our 3 big ideas that we'll feed through. But where are they going? Is success for the T20 this year getting something up on the leaders' statement, or is it something else? And I don't think that there is a right or a wrong answer there, but understanding what those goalposts are going to really help us target our work. And then the second point is really about going back to the diversity and that's the strength over other multilaterals, particularly say the G7, so what the G20 can achieve through our task force that you can't achieve in the G7. And you know, that collaboration, that North-South collaboration, the South-South cooperation as well, that's a really key point that I think will be a strong theme throughout our digital public infrastructure task force this year. I think they're all the key points that I needed to make, but thanks everyone, and thanks especially to our working group, or our task force. It's going to be a very productive year. Thanks.
Thanks, Erin. If we can have Anita Prakash, co-chair for TF3, on stage now.
Thank you very much. Very, very good afternoon to all my friends and colleagues and invited guests here. I'm reporting on the proceedings of the Task Force 3, which we have conducted so far. I'm one of the co-chairs of the Task Force 3, and this particular task force is headlined as Life, Resilience, and Value for Well-being. And the life, as many of us here would know, especially the audience, this has been discussed over yesterday also, is the whole concept of bringing in the values for environment, the values from equality, the values from equity, everything rolled into the whole planning process, especially the infrastructure planning and financing, which is this task force role. So very briefly, this task force embodies the immense importance for infrastructure for growth and infrastructure financing, with the very, very contemporary and even existential issues of integrating ethics and values into the plans and tools for growth. So for several years, the policy planners have been conversing on issues of climate, sustainability, resilience, etc., inclusive growth, measuring growth on separate policy platforms. In the G20 presidency of India, the values and norms which are at the core of these efforts are being aimed to bring together and to feed them into the G20 tracks for finance, infrastructure, investments, and perhaps even the developmental working group. So the task force is divided into 3 sub-work streams for the benefit of layering this very, very integrated yet very important principles of sustainability, ethics, integrity, and infrastructure. So work stream 1 looks at life and promoting sustainable consumption. The members of the task force have opted according to their experience and abilities into the 3 work streams. So in this first work stream, sub-work stream, I should say, we have members such as the eminent Sita Prabhu, Norma Masuri, Sarah, Shachiprabha Kumar, Shaili Kedia, Sunita Narayan, and of course our very own Sabyasachi Saha from RIS. The second work stream is about building integrity and ethics. T.C. James again from RIS, a visiting fellow to RIS, Amrita Naralekar, Ashok Khosla, Dr. Balasubramanian, Gladys Lakini, Justin Vyas, Thomas Poge. These are the eminent names that we have as co-chairs in the second work stream. And the third one, catalyzing investments for disaster-resilient infrastructure, cities, and societies. We have Syed Aslan, who is leading, coordinating from RIS side again. And we have an esteemed Danang Padikasit from Indonesia. He did all the heavy lifting last year in Indonesian chairmanship. We have Devolina Kundu. We have, we also have Nicolas. We have Francesco, and myself, yours truly, Anita Prakash. So within the 3 work streams, the one, we are looking at what is called, we are looking at policy briefs which will address sustainable consumption, the 3 R's, reuse, recycle, decarbonization, and all the issues related with these. Green transition, economic transformation, integrated development, and reskilling. So these are the several issues which are related with the first work stream are being looked at, are being sought in the policy brief abstracts that are being submitted to us. In the work stream 2, integrity and ethics in financial institutions. Now this is something which is also being discussed under different, in other tracks also, but in a different manner. And here we are trying to look at policy briefs which will address how to build integrity and ethics in the architecture of financial institutions, in the research, in science and technology, including the AI, and even in international relations. And in the work stream 3, we are trying to look at policy briefs which address the heavy issue of catalyzing investments for resilient infrastructure. Now, this is something which previous task forces and previous G20 presidencies have also been discussing, but this time we are trying to look at policy briefs which are indeed addressing the investment in infrastructure issues, but are also able to establish cross-linkages between the 3 work streams, especially with the life and promoting sustainable consumption issues. And in this process, we are also trying to see if trying to select those policy briefs which are submitted by more than 1 authors. That is to say, more than 1 people are cooperating for writing those policy briefs. And so besides the main and the first important task of delivering, choosing policy briefs under this task force, we have so far, the date is 17th January, but we have so far received 100 abstracts. So we have so far been able to go through a few of them. The overwhelming response we have found so far is that much of the policy brief abstracts are coming from the South, and we hope that we get a more northern perspective also. Having spoken about our work so far on the core task of getting the policy brief outcomes from this task force, we also aim at bringing out a statement, which is also an objective of all the other task forces. And in that statement, this task force is trying to bring out the issues of inclusivity, the global connectedness, planning for people, or planning for the universe as opposed to planning for people, building ethical principles and norms, value-based research, sustainability and equating sustainability with equity. And we are also trying to look at drivers or institutions or institutional arrangements that will be able to sustain these outcomes into the later parts, the later years, especially in the upcoming presidencies in Brazil and South Africa, all representing the voice of the South. And we are also looking at important issues on ethical measurement of growth, especially given the theme of India's presidency. That comes very naturally, that sits very naturally in this task force. So that is another example of where we are trying to sustain the outcomes of this task force into later years. A very important theme that has emerged in our discussions is to establish a G7 and G20 Connect. And we are trying to work on that from a think tank perspective. Several of our members are working on it. On side events, and this is the final part of my presentation today, we have already started our efforts in the next few days in Bhopal, and this will be later followed by important events on G7 and G20 Connect. There will possibly be a TII side event in Germany, and the NIUA in New Delhi is also partnering with BBSR and UNICEF India. These are the ones we know as of now, and ERIA located in Indonesia will also be participating in some of the side events of this task force. So thank you very much. With that, I'll end my summing up of Task Force 3.
Thank you for that summary. And for Task Force 4, if I can invite Toni, who is co-chair.
Hello. As I know that we are between telling what the working groups, the talk of the task force talked and the lunch, I will try to be short. So our work group has been coordinated by Samir. So, and there are two, perhaps, words I wanted just to give you a flavor of how we worked. The two words that I selected is efficiency and fun. So we had a lot of fun, and we were very efficient in terms of the time. In terms of the way that we worked, first we talked a lot about the process. We received more than 150 abstracts, so it's a lot of work for the working group. And we quickly decided how we would work together on looking at those 150 abstracts. So we have 5 work streams, so we divided ourselves. So the Secretariat will be dividing the 150 abstracts, and perhaps comes more, into 5 work streams, and each of us, the co-chairs, decided which of the work streams we would like to be part in reviewing the abstract. So I think we have a good pathways on how we're going to go forward. We also talked about the meetings that we want to have. We already had 3 meetings, and we decided we want to meet monthly now and when and how. We're also going to have some on-site meetings that are already being scheduled, at least 4 of them coming up, but also some online meetings that we are going to have, and which issues we would like to discuss in each of those meetings. There was also a lot of encouragement of other side meetings that we will have on our countries. Then in terms of process, we also talk how we're going to get into the recommendation. Our group has been quite efficient on bringing the 3 big ideas, each of the co-chairs. So we had a little chance to review the 3 big ideas of each of us and discuss which consensus we had, just give a little bit flavor for the Secretariat so that they can come up with a draft of the key recommendations of the working group. And we divided all of them, going a little bit on the content, on high principles. So we talked a little bit of some of the high principles that will guide our work. For example, the issues, the relationship between G7 and G20, relationship between developed and developing countries. We should remember our task force is refueling growth, clean energy, and green transition. So obviously for North and South countries, that makes a lot of difference, and we need to now look into that big principle. Just transition as also a big principle that will guide the green transition and the energy transition that we are talking about, as well as the social and economic issues that comes up with the green transition. Then we looked at the need and wanting to go into very specific recommendations, policy recommendations that we will bring to G20. So we looked we talked a little bit about recommendations related to sectors, for example, steel, cement, and others. We talked about also recommendations that may come up related to energy sources like green hydrogen, biofuels, nukes, and others. We talk a lot about circular economy, energy efficiency, and material efficiency. There's a whole block related to that in terms of recommendation. Climate finance to fund the whole transition was also a lot of discussion. Within that, we talked about fossil fuel subsidies and incentive for green transition, carbon markets and carbon pricing, some de-risking some of the topics that we talked about. Technology transfer, a lot of discussion on technology transfer that we talked, and also monitoring and evaluation, taxonomy that will guide the green transitions that we are going to go about. And a final word that I want to talk about the task force. We looked at the G20 and especially the T20 as a platform. So not only looking at recommendations that we wanted to make for now the presidency of India in terms of going forward with key recommendations, but also looking at the G20 and the G20 as a platform of key topics that we may want to discuss going forward, not only now in India, but obviously then G20 in Brazil and South Africa, and learning from the G20s that we had before in Indonesia, for example, that played a big role. So some of the key topics that we start talking there is the issue of urban planning and materials in cities. That is maybe one of the topics that we want to bring, and back again on the efficiencies of materials. So as I said, I think our task group, and I want to thank all the task group members and obviously our chair, kept us very much online, on time. So thank you so much, and looking forward to the work with the rest of the group going forward. Thank you.
Thank you. We're glad to note that the discussions for TF4 were both efficient and fun. If we can have Amar Bhattacharya, co-chair for TF5 next.
Thank you. So I'm going to report on Task Force 5, which was about reassessing the global financial order. And I think it's fair to say that we certainly had fun. I think we were efficient. And I think we have a path forward, which is the important thing. So our task force spent most of our time deliberating on what should be the contours of the substance of the work we are trying to achieve, and a game plan going forward under the able leadership of our chairs, Ashima Goel and Deepak Mishra. I think it's fair to say that we had a very inclusive discussion, and the framing that we came up with, best way to put it is that we are at a moment of crises, but we are also at a moment of tremendous opportunity in which the global financial order will have to play a key role. As we heard from Suman Berry, there are not only immediate pressures that we are facing in the global economy, but also the risks of a lost decade. And we know that in order to deliver on the SDGs and on climate, as we just heard from the previous speaker, we will have to make the financial order fit for purpose. And that must be the objective of our task force. In that, the key means to do it is a scaling up of investment with innovation, both to drive recovery and to get new and better forms of growth, linking development and climate in a very integral way. So in order to deliver this, we identified some key priorities in terms of finance. The first is the imperative to deliver on the quantity of finance that will be necessary, coming from multiple different sources. Second, to be able to tackle the cost of finance, the volatility of finance. And third, to have a framework that can allow us to move forward on implementation and governance. Those are the key kind of objectives that we set for ourselves of a financial order fit for purpose. But the cross-cutting elements for this, we feel in terms of priorities, A, development finance, the multilateral development banks, but also local development finance institutions have a central role to play in this new financial system. Second, recognizing that private finance will be an important part, but private finance is at the moment not being brought to bear, in part because of the impediments on cost of capital, issues of risk, the need to be able to have a better structures on blended finance. Third, we will need to unpack finance in terms of innovative ways, whether that is through SDRs, as we heard, through means, in the climate finance space, whether it is carbon taxes, whether it is voluntary and compliant carbon markets, financial transaction type approaches, harnessing private philanthropy, and finally, the importance at this point in time of debt and debt sustainability, because we will need to take on more debt, but that debt will have to be sustainable. What approaches make sense, and how do we ensure that we are tackling also the immediate constraints that we are facing on debt? Because finance is a means, we will have to recognize that the work of this group will overlap with the other groups, because finance is a way to deliver on many of the other objectives that we just discussed. So we will certainly have to coordinate in terms of thinking about our work and the work of other groups. Next, I would say that in terms of our work program, we recognize that there are going to be a large number of abstracts that have to be aligned with these objectives and the framework that we set. And we also have to see whether there are gaps that have to be filled strategically, and for that the chair and the co-chairs will take responsibility in terms of making sure that we have a coherent, strategic, and complete work program to respond to the priorities we have set. In terms of side events, we think we should have maybe 3 or 4 side events all around the themes that I have laid out. One which we have agreed on is between the Indonesian T20 presidency and the Indian T20 presidency, with anchored by Bambang Brojonegoro, who was the T20 chair for Indonesia, and that will focus very much on issues of governance, on issues of blended finance, and on some of the themes around taxation and the like, which we would have in Indonesia. We are also planning to partner with EGRO foundations in setting up structures of webinars that can take the messages of the group, identifying, also bringing in key speakers that can contribute to the work of our task force, and we will define some others as we define the work plan. We also intend to stay in close touch with the relevant groups of the G20, in particular the Sustainable Finance Working Group and the International Financial Architecture Working Group, and we look forward very much to engaging with all of the other task forces so that in some sense we are supporting the overall strategic priorities, of course all under the guidance of Samir and the T20 chair. So that's a report on our group, and really look forward to a very vigorous year of work this year, as the previous speaker said, full of fun and full of results. Thank you.
Thank you. If we can have Mr. G.A. Tadas, Chair for TF6, on stage.
Thank you, T20 Chair and all the esteemed members present here. I would say that, in the last 2 days since yesterday morning, we have had a wonderful discussion and keynote addresses on very important issues which permeate through all the work streams that the Task Force 6 is going to cover. As you see, the Task Force 6 is dealing with accelerating SDGs, and SDGs cover virtually every aspect of the development, whether it is economic development or the social development. So you would find that the strains of the SDGs will be there in the discussion on whether it is global financial order, or whether it is multilateralism, or whether it is life or values and well-being. So many issues have been raised in the last 2 days. We have taken note of that as a task force team, and we have had discussion yesterday and today among all the task force 6 members. I think for the benefit of all those who are here, I would like to mention the members of the task force 6. As you know, task force 6 is very wide in terms of the issues that are going to be covered, the work streams that are going to be covered. One is on the food security, nutrition, climate smart agriculture. The second is on the water security and conservation. Third is on promoting holistic outcomes in health. Fourth is on preserving biodiversity and blue economy. Then fifth is on gender sensitive SDG programs and investing in children. And the last is the overarching Agenda 2030 and the partnerships. We have the members from India and from across the world. From India, we have 6 members. One is Dr. Nagesh Kumar from Institute for Studies in Industrial Development. Second is Renana Zebwala from SEWA. Third is Shailesh Nayak from NIS Bangalore. And then we have Shamika Ravi from ORF. Then Shambhavi Nayak from Takshila Institute. And then Uttam Sinha from IDSA. Then from overseas members, we have Bambang from Indonesia, round, and then Elizabeth from South Africa, and then Famida Khan from Khatun from Bangladesh, then from Dr. Fabia from Brazil, and Ivan Oliveira from Brazil, and then Dr. Seke from South Africa, Dr. Pamla from South Africa, Dr. Riatu from Indonesia, who was also very active in the T20 process of Indonesia last year, and then we have Victoria from Russia. So you can see we have about 14 members in the task force 6 plus 2 of us, so it makes it 16, and Dr. Kalpana has just left after the last session. We discussed all the policy briefs we received till date. We have received more than 220 policy briefs. It is one of the largest, I understand. And that also increases the workload on the task force members. What we have decided is that we will allocate all these policy briefs among, there are 6 work streams. So we'll be having about 6 working groups, and we'll be allocating all the policy briefs to all these 6 working groups. And based on certain guidelines that we are going to set, we'll be shortlisting the policy briefs. And we have 3 more days to close the policy brief submission. I think I understand it is still, the number is still ticking, so we may have many more policy briefs. Now on the side events, what we have received interest is from among the members themselves, they have evinced interest in organizing side events and main events. There are about 8 side and main events. I don't know, there is a time limit, I understand. I can otherwise give the details of all of them. I think for the benefit of the members, let me give some details. Okay, so I will summarize. We have about 8 to 10 side events and main events which will be organized from the members of the task force. And we have also received interest from other organizations. Like we have from Manipal Academy of Higher Education, who will be interested in organizing events on health-related issues. We have One Health, One World from Singapore, who are interested in organizing a webinar series on the health-related issues. And we have APLAM, Asia Pacific Leaders Malaysia Alliance, again from Singapore, who are interested again in organizing some main events. And then we have JNU in collaboration with OHPH, who will be One Health, again, Poultry Hub, who will be organizing a side event. So we have a lot of interest which we have received, and I think it's going to be a very interesting time to come. And I'm sure that with the help of all the task force members, we'll be able to deliver the tasks assigned to us, and we will have an interesting time to come, and many more recommendations are going to come from the deliberations that we are going to have in the time to come. Thank you very much.
Thank you. If we can have Andrew de Mello, who is co-chair for TF7.
Thanks, Chair. I'll try to be brief. I'm reporting on Task Force 7, which is about towards reform, multilateralism, transforming global institutions and frameworks. Most of our time in the breakout sessions has been spent on substantive discussions, and they were very rich discussions which had contributions from very different viewpoints. So I'll try to summarize that here. We parted on the premise that multilateralism is something that to be valued, to be preserved, and obviously to be reformed. And this takes place in a context of transforming globalization, a process which some call deglobalization, others just conceive it as moving towards a different kind of globalization, if you will. And it's also important to emphasize the focus here is very much on reforming institutions. It's a reformist approach, so to speak, rather than replacing them, even though on some particular issue areas there have been proposals of creating new institutions, such as when we talk about the UN Security Council. Two issues that have come up repeatedly and that have underlied the entire discussions have been, first, one of inclusiveness, which is closely related to the legitimacy of institutions. So institutions are legitimate by and large if and to the extent which they are inclusive, excuse me. But the other issue has been effectiveness or efficiency. And some would argue that there's a trade-off here. That, to the extent that you increase inclusiveness, you tend to reduce efficiency because of collective action problems. Other members of the task force have argued that it may be the contrary, at least in some situations. When you bring new members in, institutions become more effective, particularly if the members are big players, important stakeholders such as the BRICS. So the main challenge here would be to try to strike the right balance between inclusiveness and efficiency. What we see in many issue areas of global governance is that when we reach a deadlock or we cannot move forward in multilateral institutions, particularly the big ones and most important ones, new institutions are created. So we see this in the ambit of the BRICS. Since the BRICS were largely unable to reform the IMF and the World Bank to the extent that they wished, too little and too late was done. They created, for example, the new development bank and the contingent reserve arrangement. You see this in trade very clearly as there was deadlocks in the WTO. Several plurilateral, minilateral, regional agreements have come up. And this leads to a great fragmentation of global governance. And again, we have different views here regarding this fragmentation. Some would see it as something that contributes to undermine efficiency of global governance, as you have several institutions which somewhat overlap and even contradict each other. Others see it as something necessary and that may actually be a force taking us forward in reaching more substantive and deeper agreements. So several members emphasize the need for pragmatism moving forward, even if by means of agreements within like-minded countries in smaller settings. And the role of the G20 here has been stressed as being building bridges, and bridges not just between stakeholders and countries, but also between these different institutions. And one of our work streams is precisely the coordination between multilateral institutions, and one that has been favored or has been the preference of working for most of the members of the task force. There have been proposals to look at past experience with multilateralism to guide us forward, and perhaps to take a more humble view in that we cannot reform the entire multilateral system, and perhaps we should not attempt to do so, but we should look at more specific cases. In this regard, it is also important to note that the G20 itself has some of the main challenges and contradictions that we see in other multilateral institutions. So it's not like the G20 is somewhat hanging above them and can guide them from a higher status, if you will, or higher standing. And the G20 would only be effective and successful if and to the extent that it can also involve all these other institutions, and particularly the big ones. Finally, it has been stressed that it would be important to have development as a main work stream of the T20 and the G20. This is an issue area that underlies all the other ones. It is cross-cutting, but it is nonetheless very important that it be addressed in its own right. And Regarding the policy briefs, I'll just mention that they were distributed according to the preferences of the work streams of the members, and we're still waiting for some that will still be submitted before the deadlines, but we hope to move forward on that as well. And I'll stop here because I don't want to delay you further for lunch. Many thanks.
Thank you, Rapporteurs, and thank you, Task Force members. I think we can all take away that the breadth and scope of the discussions in the breakout sessions so far have given the Think20 a head start for the task ahead. I'm now going to invite Ambassador Sujan Chenoy, who's Chair for T20 India Core Group and Director General of IDSA, to deliver the closing remarks, and he will also be giving us a short overview of the meeting of the International Advisory Board that happened on the sidelines of the conference.
I don't know what I did wrong, but I was asked to come back on again. Just a very big thank you for all the hard work that's been put in by the various task forces. As far as the International Advisory Council is concerned, all I can say is that we wanted to work as a team and that we will be sharing all our output with one another. We want each one of the members to be chairs for the Think20 in their own domains and regions so that they can also bring to bear the viewpoints that may exist in their part of the world. We will sort of write the communiqué recommendations together as a team in an open and transparent manner. And is there anything else that you want me to say? Yeah. He can also make some substantive remarks, no doubt. But from my side, a very big thank you until we meet again. And enjoy your lunch as well. Thank you.
I'm not making any substantive remarks. I'm just making some housekeeping announcements for your lunch and thereafter. So one, that we are going to be going for the visit, the tour of Rashtrapati Bhavan Museum at 2:30 from the reception. So